family. Welcome to the Joyful House and welcome to Once Upon a Storybook. Hope you're having a great Sunday, a wonderful weekend, and a great start to December 2025. Today we are continuing to read the Anne of Green Gables series, book number 4, and we are looking at third year, chapters 11 and 12. So if you are ready to embark on this storybook journey with me, then sit back, relax, and let's see where this takes us. Chapter 11. The dining room was in keeping with the rest of the house. There was another ornate chandelier, an equally ornate gilt-frame mirror over the mantelpiece, and a table beautifully set with silver and crystal and old crown derby. The supper, served by a rather grim and ancient maid, was bountiful and exceedingly good, and Anne's healthy young appetite did full justice to it. Miss Minerva kept silent for a time, and Anne dared say nothing for fear of starting another avalanche of tragedies. Once, a large, sleek black cat came in the room and sat down by Miss Minerva with a hoarse meow. Miss Minerva poured a saucer of cream and set it down before him. She seemed so much more human after this that Anne lost a deal of her awe of the last of the Tom Gallons. "Do have some more of the peaches, my dear. You've eaten nothing, positively nothing." "Oh, Miss Tom Gallan, I've enjoyed—" "The Tom Gallons always set a good table," said Miss Minerva complacently. "My Aunt Sophia made the best sponge cake I ever tasted. And I think the only person my father ever hated coming over to our house was his sister Mary, because she had such a poor appetite. She just minced and tasted. He took it as a personal insult. Father was a very unrelenting man. He never forgave my brother Richard for marrying against his will. He ordered him out of the house, and he was never allowed to enter it again. Father always repeated the Lord's Prayer at family worship every morning, but after Richard flouted him, he always left out the sentence, 'Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us.' I can see him," said Miss Minerva dreamily, "kneeling there, leaving it out." After supper, they went to the smallest of the 3 drawing rooms, which was still rather big and grim, and spent the evening before the huge fire, a pleasant, friendly enough fire. Anne crocheted at a set of intricate doilies, and Miss Minerva knitted away at an afghan. Oh, excuse me. Anne crocheted at a set of intricate doilies, and Miss Minerva knitted away at an afghan, and kept up what was practically a monologue composed in great part of colorful and gruesome Tom Gallan history. This is a house of tragical memories, my dear. Miss Tom Gallan, didn't any pleasant thing ever happen in this house? Asked Anne, achieving a complete sentence by a mere fluke. Miss Minerva had to stop talking long enough to blow her nose. "Oh, I suppose so," said Miss Minerva, as if she hated to admit it. "Yes, of course, we used to have gay times here when I was a girl. They tell me you're writing a book about everyone in Summerside, my dear." "I'm not. There isn't a word of truth." "Oh," Miss Minerva was plainly a little disappointed. "Well, if you ever do, you're at liberty to use any of our stories you like, perhaps with the names disguised. And now, what do you say to a game of parcheesi?" "I'm afraid it's time I was going." "Oh, my dear, you can't go home tonight. It's pouring cats and dogs. And listen to the wind. I don't keep a carriage now. I have so little use for one, and you can't walk half a mile in this deluge. You must be my guest for the night." Anne was not sure she wanted to spend a night in Tom Gallan house, but neither did she want to walk to Windy Poplars in a March tempest. So they had their game of parcheesi, in which Miss Minerva was so interested that she forgot to talk about horrors, and then a bedtime snack. They ate cinnamon toast and drank cocoa out of old Tom Gallon cups of marvelous thinness and beauty. Finally, Miss Minerva took her up to a guest room which Anne at first was glad to see was not the one where Miss Minerva's sister had died of a stroke. "This is Annabella's room," said Miss Minerva, lighting the candles in the silver candlesticks on a rather pretty green dressing table and turning out the gas. Matthew Tom Gallon had blown out the gas one night, whereupon exit Matthew Tom Gallon. She was the handsomest of all the Tom Gallons. That's her picture above the mirror. Do you notice what a proud mouth she had? She made that crazy quilt on the bed. I hope you'll be comfortable, my dear. Mary has aired the bed and put 2 hot bricks in it, and she has aired this nightdress for you," pointing to an ample flannel garment hanging over a chair and smelling strongly of mothballs. "I hope it will fit you. It hasn't been worn since poor mother died in it. Oh, I nearly forgot to tell you." Miss Minerva turned back at the door. "This is the room Oscar Tom Gallon came back to life in after being thought dead for 2 days. They didn't want him to, you know. That was the tragedy. I hope you'll sleep well there, my dear." Oh my gosh. Anne did not know if she could sleep at all or not. Suddenly there seemed something strange and alien in the room, something a little hostile. But is there not something strange about any room that has been occupied through generations? Death has lurked in it. Love has been rosy red in it. Births have been here. All the passions, all the hope. It is full of rafts. But this was really rather a terrible old house, full of the ghost of dead hatreds and heartbreaks, crowded with dark deeds that had never been dragged into light and were still festering in its corners and hidey holes. Too many women must have wept here. The wind wailed very eerily in the spruces by the window. For a moment Anne felt like running out, storm or no storm. Then she took herself resolutely in hand and commanded common sense. If tragic and dreadful things had happened here, many shadowy years gone, amusing and loving things must have happened too. Gay and pretty girls had danced here and talked over their charming secrets. Dimpled babies had been born here. There had been weddings and balls and musics and laughter. The sponge cake lady must have been a comfortable creature and the unforgiven Richard a gallant lover. I'll think on these things and go to bed. What a quilt to sleep under. I wonder if I'll be as crazy as it is by morning. And this is a spare room? I'll never forget what a thrill it used to give me to sleep in anyone's spare room. Anne uncoiled and brushed her hair under the very nose of Annabella Tom Gallon, who stared down at her with a face in which there was pride and vanity, and something of the insolence of great beauty. Anne felt a little creepy as she looked in the mirror. Who knew what faces might look out of it at her? All the tragic and haunted ladies who had ever looked into it, perhaps. She bravely opened the closet door, half expecting any number of skeletons to tumble out, and hung up her dress. She sat down calmly on a rigid chair which looked as if it would be insulted if anyone sat on it and took off their shoes. Then she put on the flannel nightgown, blew out the candles, and got into the bed, pleasantly warm from Mary's bricks. For a little while, the rain, streaming on the panes, and the shriek of the wind around the old eaves prevented her from sleeping. Then she forgot all the Tom Gallon tragedies in dreamless slumber until she found herself looking at dark fir boughs against a red sunrise. "I've enjoyed having you so much, my dear," said Miss Minerva when Anne left after breakfast. "We've had a real cheerful visit, haven't we? Though I've lived so long alone, I've almost forgotten how to talk. And I need not say what a delight it is to meet a really charming and unspoiled young girl in this frivolous age. I didn't tell you yesterday, but it was my birthday, and it was very pleasant to have a bit of youth in the house. There is nobody to remember my birthday now." Miss Minerva gave a faint sigh. "And once there were so many." "Well, I suppose you heard a pretty grim chronicle," said Aunt Chatty that night. "Did all those things Miss Minerva told me really happen, Aunt Chatty?" Well, the queer thing is, they did, said Aunt Chatty. It's a curious thing, Miss Shirley, but a lot of awful things did happen to the Tom Gallons. I don't know that there were so many more than happen in any large family in the course of 6 generations, said Aunt Kate. Oh, I think there were. They really did seem under a curse. So many of them died sudden or violent deaths. Of course, there's a streak of insanity in them. Everyone knows that. That was curse enough. But I've heard an old story, I can't recall the details, of the carpenter who built the house cursing it. Something about the contract. Old Paul Tom Gallon held him to it, and it ruined him. It cost so much more than he had figured. Miss Minerva seemed rather proud of the curse, said Anne. Poor old thing. It's all she has, said Rebecca Dew. Anne smiled to think of the stately Miss Minerva being referred to as poor old thing, but she went to the towel room and wrote to Gilbert. I thought Tom Gallon House was a sleepy old place where nothing ever happened. Well, perhaps things don't happen now, but evidently they did. Little Elizabeth is always talking of tomorrow, but the old Tom Gallon House is yesterday. I'm glad I don't live in yesterday. That tomorrow is still a friend. Of course, I think Miss Minerva has all the Tom Gallon liking for the spotlight and gets no end of satisfaction out of her tragedies. They are to her what husband and children are to other women. But oh, Gilbert, no matter how old we get in years to come, don't let's ever see life as all tragedy and revel in it. I think I'd hate a house 120 years old. I hope when we get our house of dreams, it will either be new, ghostless, or traditionless. Or, if that can't be, at least have been occupied by reasonably happy people. I shall never forget my night at Tom Gallon House, and for once in my life, I've met a person who could talk me down. All right, chapter 12. Little Elizabeth Grayson had been born expecting things to happen. That they seldom happened under the watchful eyes of grandmother and the woman never brightened her expectations in the least. Things were just bound to happen sometime. If not today, then tomorrow. When Miss Shirley came to live at Windy Poplars, Elizabeth felt that tomorrow must be very close at hand, and her visit to Green Gable was like a foretaste of it. But now, in the June of Miss Shirley's 3rd and last year in Summerside High, little Elizabeth's heart had descended into the nice button boots grandmother had always got for her to wear. Many children at the school where she was envied little Elizabeth those beautiful button kid boots. But little Elizabeth cared nothing about button boots when she could not thread the way to freedom in them. And now her adored Miss Shirley was going away from her forever. At the end of June, she would be leaving Summerside and going back to that beautiful Green Gables. Little Elizabeth simply could not bear the thought of it. It was of no use for Miss Shirley to promise that she would have her down to Green Gables in the summer before she was married. Little Elizabeth knew somehow that grandmother would not let her go again. Little Elizabeth knew grandmother had never really approved of her intimacy with Miss Shirley. It will be the end of everything, Miss Shirley, she sobbed. Let's hope, darling, that it is only a new beginning, said Anne cheerfully, but she felt downcast herself. No word had ever come from little Elizabeth's father. Either her letter had never reached him, or he did not care. And if he did not care, what was to become of Elizabeth? It was bad enough now in her childhood, but what would be later on? These 2 old dames will boss her to death, Rebecca Dew had said. Anne felt that there was more truth than elegance in her remark. Elizabeth knew that she was bossed, and she especially resented being bossed by the woman. She did not like it in grandmother, of course, but no one conceded reluctantly that perhaps a grandmother had a certain right to boss you. But what right had the woman? Elizabeth always wanted to ask her that right out. She would do it sometime, when tomorrow came, and oh, how she would enjoy the look on the woman's face. Grandmother would never let little Elizabeth go out walking by herself, for fear, she said, that she might be kidnapped by gypsies. A child had been once 40 years before. It was very seldom that gypsies came to the island now, and little Elizabeth felt that it was only an excuse. But why should grandmother care whether she was kidnapped or not? Elizabeth knew that grandmother and the woman didn't love her at all. Why, they never even spoke of her by her name if they could help it. It was always the child. How Elizabeth hated to be called the child, just as they might have spoken of the dog or the cat, if there had been one. But when Elizabeth had ventured a protest, grandmother's face had grown dark and angry, and little Elizabeth had been punished for impertinence, while the woman looked on, well content. Little Elizabeth often wondered just why the woman hated her. Why should anyone hate you when you were so small? Could you be worth hating? Little Elizabeth did not know that the mother whose life she had cost had been that bitter old woman's darling, and if she had known, could not have understood what perverted shapes thwarted love can take. Little Elizabeth hated the gloomy, splendid evergreens, where everything seemed unacquainted with her, although she had lived in it all her life. But after Miss Shirley had come to Windy Poplars, everything had changed magically. Little Elizabeth lived in a world of romance after Miss Shirley's coming. There was beauty wherever you looked. Fortunately, grandmother and the woman couldn't prevent you from looking through. Elizabeth had no doubt that would if they could. Let me reread that. That didn't sound right to me. There was beauty wherever you looked. Fortunately, grandmother and the woman couldn't prevent you from looking, though Elizabeth had no doubt they would if they could. That's better. The short walks along the red magic of the harbor road, which was all too rarely permitted to share with Miss Shirley, were the highlights in her shadowy life. She loved everything she saw, the faraway lighthouse painted in odd red and white rings, the far, dim blue shores, the little silvery blue waves, the range lights that gleamed through the violet dusk, all gave her so much delight that it hurt. And the harbor with its smoky islands and glowing sunsets. Elizabeth always went up to a window in the mansard roof to watch them through the treetops. And the ships that sailed at the rising of the moon, ships that came back, ships that never came back. Elizabeth longed to go in one of them, on a voyage to the island of happiness. The ships that never came back stayed there, where it was always tomorrow. That mysterious red road ran on, and her feet etched to follow it. Where did it lead to? Sometimes Elizabeth thought she would burst if she didn't find out. When tomorrow really came, she would fare forth on it and perhaps find an island all her own where she and Miss Shirley could live alone, and grandmother and the woman would never come. They both hated water and would not put foot in a boat for anything. Little Elizabeth liked to picture herself standing on her island and mocking them as they stood vainly glowering on the mainland shore. "This is tomorrow," she would taunt them. "You can't catch me anymore. You are only in today." What fun it would be! How she would enjoy the look on the woman's face. Then one evening in late June, an amazing thing happened. Miss Shirley had told Miss Campbell that she had an errand next day at Flying Cloud to see a certain Miss Thompson, who was convener of the refreshment committee of the Ladies' Aid, and might she take Elizabeth with her? Grandmother had agreed with her usual dourness. Elizabeth could never understand why she agreed at all, being completely ignorant of the Pringle horror of a certain bit of information Miss Shirley possessed, but she had agreed. "We'll go right down to the harbor mouth," whispered Anne, "and I've done my errand at Flying Cloud, after I've done my errand at Flying Cloud." Little Elizabeth went to bed in such excitement that she didn't expect to sleep a wink. At last she was going to answer the lure on the road that had called so long. In spite of her excitement, she conscientiously went through her little ritual of retiring. She folded her clothes and cleaned her teeth and brushed her golden hair. She thought she had rather pretty hair, though of course it wasn't like Miss Shirley's lovely red gold, with the ripples in it and the little love locks that curled around her ears. Little Elizabeth would have given anything to have had hair like Miss Shirley's. Before she got into bed, little Elizabeth opened one of the drawers in the high, black, polished old bureau and took a carefully hidden picture from under a pile of hankies. A picture of Miss Shirley, which she had cut out of a special edition of the Weekly Courier that had reproduced a photograph of the high school staff. "Good night, dearest Miss Shirley." She kissed the picture and returned it to its hiding place. Then she climbed into bed and cuddled down under the blankets. For the June night was cool and the breeze of the harbor searching. Indeed, it was more than a breeze tonight. It whistled and banged and shook and thumped, and Elizabeth knew the harbor would be a tossing expanse of waves under the moonlight. What fun it would be to steal down close to it under the moon. But it was only in tomorrow that one could do that. Where was Flying Cloud? And what a name! Out of tomorrow again. It was maddening to be so near tomorrow and not be able to get into it. But suppose the wind blew up rain for tomorrow. Elizabeth knew she would never be allowed to go anywhere in the rain. She sat up in bed and clasped her hands. "Dear God," she said, "I don't like to meddle, but could you see that it is a fine tomorrow? Please, dear God." The next afternoon was glorious. Little Elizabeth felt as if she had slipped from some invisible shackle when she and Miss Shirley walked away from that house of gloom. She took a huge gulp of freedom, even if the woman was scowling after them through the red glass of the big front door. How heavenly to be walking through the lovely world with Miss Shirley. It was always so wonderful to be alone with Miss Shirley. What would she do when Miss Shirley had gone? But little Elizabeth put that thought firmly away. She wouldn't spoil the day by thinking it. Perhaps, a great perhaps, she and Miss Shirley would get into tomorrow this afternoon, and they would never be separated. Little Elizabeth just wanted to walk quietly on towards that blueness at the end of the world, drinking in the beauty around her. Every turn and kink of the road revealed new loveliness, and it turned and kinked interminably, following the windings of a tiny river that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. On every side were fields of buttercups and clover, were bees that were buzzing. Now and then they walked through a milky way of daisies. Far out of the strait laughed at them in silver-tipped waves. The harbor was like water silk. Little Elizabeth liked it better that way than when it was like pale blue satin. They drank the wind in. It was very gentle wind. It purred about them and seemed to coax them on. "Isn't it nice walking with the wind like this?" said little Elizabeth. "A nice, friendly, perfume wind," said Anne, more to herself than Elizabeth. "Such a wind as I used to think a mistral was. Mistral sounds like that. What a disappointment when I found out it was a rough, disagreeable wind." Elizabeth didn't quite understand. She had never heard of the mistral, but the music of her beloved voice was enough for her. The very sky was glad. A sailor with gold rings in his ears, the very kind of person who you would meet in tomorrow, smiled as he passed them. Elizabeth thought of a verse she had learned in Sunday school. "The little hills rejoice on every side." Had the man who wrote that ever seen hills like those blue ones over the harbor? "I think this road leads right to God," she said dreamily. "Perhaps," said Anne. "Perhaps all roads do, little Elizabeth. We turn off here just now. We must go over to that island. That's Flying Cloud." Flying Cloud was a long, slender islet, lying about a quarter of a mile from the shore. There were trees on it and a house. Little Elizabeth had always wished she might have an island of her own, with a little bay of silver sand in it. "How do we get to it?" "We'll row out in this flat," said Miss Shirley, picking up the oar in a small boat tied to a leaning tree. Miss Shirley could row. Was there anything Miss Shirley couldn't do? When they reached the island, it proved to be a fascinating place where anything might happen. Of course it was in tomorrow. Islands like this didn't happen except in tomorrow. They had no part or a lot in humdrum today. A little maid who met them at the door of the house told Anne she could find Miss Thompson on the far end of the island, picking wild strawberries. Fancy an island where strawberries grew. Anne went to hunt Miss Thompson up, but first she asked little Elizabeth might wait in the living room. Anne was thinking that little Elizabeth looked rather tired after her unaccustomedly long walk and needed a rest. Little Elizabeth didn't think she did, but Miss Shirley's lightest wish was law. It was a beautiful room with flowers everywhere and wild sea breezes blowing in. Elizabeth liked the mirror over the mantel, which reflected the room so beautifully, and through the open window a glimpse of harbor and hill and strait. All at once a man came through the door. Elizabeth felt a moment of dismay and terror. Was he a gypsy? He didn't look like her idea of a gypsy, but of course she'd never seen one before. He might be one, and then in a swift flash of intuition, Elizabeth decided she didn't care if he did kidnap her. She liked his crinkly hazel eyes and his crinkly brown hair and his square chin and his smile, for he was smiling. "Now, who are you?" he asked. I'm me," faltered Elizabeth, still a little flustered. "Oh, to be sure. You popped out of the sea, I suppose. Come up from the dunes. No name known among mortals." Elizabeth felt that she was being made fun of a little, but she didn't mind. In fact, she rather liked it. But she answered a bit primly, "My name is Elizabeth Grayson." There was a silence, a very queer silence. The man looked at her for a moment without saying anything, and then he politely asked her to sit down. "I'm waiting for Miss Shirley," she explained. "She's gone to see Miss Thompson about the ladies' aid supper. When she comes back, we're going down to the end of the world. Now, if you have any notions of kidnapping me, Mr. Man, of course, but meanwhile you might as well be comfortable, and I must do the honors. What would you like in the way of light refreshment? Miss Thompson's cat has probably brought something in." Elizabeth sat down. She felt oddly happy at home. "Can I have just what I like?" "Certainly." "Then," said Elizabeth triumphantly, "I'd like some ice cream with strawberry jam on it." The man rang a bell and gave an order. Yes, this must be tomorrow. No doubt about it. Ice cream and strawberry jam did not appear in this magical manner in today, cats or no cats. "We'll set a share aside for your Miss Shirley," said the man. They were good friends right away. The man didn't talk a great deal, but he looked at Elizabeth very often. There was a tenderness in his face, a tenderness she had never seen before in anybody's face, not even Miss Shirley's. She felt that he liked her, and she knew that she liked him. Finally, he glanced out the window and stood up. "I think I must go now," he said. "I see your Miss Shirley coming up the walk, so you'll not be alone." "Won't you wait and see Miss Shirley?" asked Elizabeth, licking her spoon to get the last vestige of the jam. Grandmother and the woman would have died of horror had they seen her. "Not this time," said the man. Elizabeth knew he hadn't the slightest notion of kidnapping her, and she felt the strangest, most unaccountable sensation of disappointment. "Goodbye and thank you," she said politely. "It is very nice here in tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "This is tomorrow," explained Elizabeth. "I've always wanted to get into tomorrow, and now I have." "Oh, I see. Well, I'm sorry to say I don't care much about tomorrow. I would like to get back into yesterday." Little Elizabeth was sorry for him. But how could he be unhappy? How could anyone living in tomorrow be unhappy? Elizabeth looked longingly back to Flying Cloud as they rode away. Just as they pushed through the scrub spruces that fringed the shore to the road, she turned for another farewell look at it. A flying team of horses attached to a truck wagon whirled around the bend, evidently quite beyond their driver's control, and Elizabeth heard Miss Shirley shriek. Oh, what a way to end the chapter! Oh, they left us with a cliffhanger. Well, I hope you will come back and join me next Sunday as we read the next two chapters, which will also be the final two chapters of book number 4. So we will finish this book next week, but oh my gosh, what a way to end. Oh my gosh, what happens to Elizabeth and Miss Shirley? We'll have to come back and find out. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Have an amazing week. I do look forward to seeing you next Sunday as we conclude this book. And in the meantime, my friends, be joyful, be the joy in everything you do, and don't forget to hug yourself daily. Nugs and joy. I love you. Mwah. And I'll see you next week.